In the industrial era, men set the stage and the norms for companies and for behavior. And nobody thought about it because, they were working and the women were at home, right, until the war happened, right? And then things started to shift. But with those norms established, they're extremely difficult to change. So the first thing that happened was, I think men looked at women and they said, you don't act like us, so we're going to fix you.
What will you do when your money works for you? Welcome to the Tech Girl Financial Podcast with your hosts, Viktor and Kim Gaxiola. From the home office in California, here is Viktor and Kim.
Kim, we're back now with Season 3, and I'm so excited because we are really kicking off the new season with a very special guest today.
We are, and so thankful that Karen decided to come and be a part of our podcast series. I think this season is going to be really exciting with a lot of great information for our clients, friends, and listeners.
So today we're welcoming Karen Cornwell, who wrote a great book, which both you and I, Kim, have read, and it's called You Can't Fix What You Can't See, and the subtitle is An Eye-Opening Toolkit for Cultivating Gender Harmony in Business. So welcome to the program, Karen.
Thank you, Viktor and Kim. I really appreciate the invitation. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, I just, like I said, I just finished the book. It is a page turner from the standpoint of all the concepts, and I couldn't help but really relate to a lot of the concepts, and so we really want to dig deep into it. But before we start with looking at the book and the themes around the book, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, Karen?
Viktor, I spent like 30 years in tech. I have an engineering degree, a bachelor's and a master's, and I really got into that field because I love solving problems, right? That was what attracted me to that. And the second piece is I really love how people's minds work, right? I actually got a minor in psychology with my engineering degree because I was just fascinated with how the mind works. And of course, when I got my degree, we didn't really know how the mind works. A lot of information has come out recently, and we're just starting to understand that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know that the book covered a little bit about that because one of the things that we'll get into is just the difference between almost the wiring between like a male and a female and how that might actually drive, the different perspectives that they take in conversations and how they relate with each other.
And that's absolutely true. And I think we end up tripping over that a lot in the workplace, and we don't even realize it's there.
Right. And that's what, thematically in saying you can't fix what you can't see. So tell us a little bit about what that means. What can we not see?
Viktor, this is interesting. I spent my career in tech, and I've, now transitioned into I've decided we have to go out and fix this problem because we've been fixing it for 30 years, but we have essentially made no progress. Unbelievable. The World Economic Forum just published their report, 151 years to achieve gender parity in North America. This is not a third world country. Isn't that unbelievable, Kim?
Wow.
So we really have to get this fixed because we cannot pass this to what is that? Would be 3 generations, right? The next generation. It's incredible that we could even imagine that it might take that long to get gender parity in North America, because most people think, we must be up there at number 1 or number 2, and we're number 53 in the world.
Wow, that's crazy. That to me is so hard to believe, those statistics that you point out. And so what I'm curious about is what we're doing right now. We have so many different women's conferences. We were just talking about the things to get involved in. And tell us, are we going in the right track, or do we need to rethink what we're doing?
Kim, that's a really interesting question, and we have done a lot, and we have gained a lot of awareness. But one of the things that I discovered, and I tripped over it, it was by accident that I found this out. I did a seminar, invited one of the executives that I used to work with to get feedback, right? Is it working? And he sat through this 2-hour discussion, and I took him out to lunch afterwards and said, so what do you think? Are we doing the right things that executives can hear this conversation? And he said to me, Karen, I don't know what problem you're trying to solve. And I was flabbergasted. how can you not see this? And at first I thought, he was yanking my chain. But he was not. He honestly could not see it. And it took several more discussions for him to see it. And that's when I realized that's why we haven't fixed it. Because so many people can't see it. And from the engineering mind who wants to solve problems, you can't fix what you can't see.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I think there's some eye-opening that we need to do, and the things that we've been doing have not been making that happen. So I think we have to start doing some different things.
So it's interesting because you say from the engineering mind, which is, I loved reading the book because it was so different than most things that I have read on this topic or other leadership topics. I don't think they were written by engineers. And I really like the way you organized the book and the way you presented everything, because to me, it was logical. It just was a keep layering effect of everything, and really great way to gain some insight on what we can't see.
Kim, that's interesting. I've gotten that comment from several other people, and that surprised me because, you can only see what you see, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was the only way I knew how to organize the book. But apparently many people who've been writing in this space, the words frilly and puffy and a lot of other words have been used, not fact-based, and that's why I wanted my book to be a little bit different, hoping to get people to see the issue.
Right. And it's so funny because I did give the book to a couple women that I know that are leaders in the financial industry. And I prefaced it. I said, this is not your normal book, but this is going to be clear and it's going to get you to think differently. So tell us a little bit about that. I don't know if I'm jumping the gun on this, but I just love, again, how, we're talking about independent thinkers and community-minded thinkers. And I realize I'm probably more independent-minded, but sometimes I'm a community-minded person. And there have been things that I've done and programs that I've gotten involved in along the way. And I just get so frustrated sometimes because I am independent-minded. I think we're not going fast enough to solve the problem. And but other people that are more community-minded maybe want to explore all the different facets of it before they get down to work.
Kim, that's a great point. And I came up with many people have labeled male traits and female traits. And like you, I am very independent-minded. So it's like I'm a man. And I actually think that's part of why I've been really successful in the tech world for 30 years, because I think like a man, and it was really easy for me to integrate with the many, many men that I worked with. So, but when I looked at it, I said, well, I would not label myself, these female characteristics don't represent me. I'm more on the male side, except there are a few where I'm way over on the female side. And so I said, I'm not going to label this men and women. I'm going to use the independent-minded, which most people would think about as men, and community-minded that most people would think about as women, but we're really fluid. Mm-hmm. And the whole point of labeling the two categories is to give people a dichotomy on which they can put themselves and they can put other people, so you can see where the differences are, and that means you may need to take a different approach, or you may need to understand, coming from their perspective, how to interpret what they're saying.
Well, I think that was an important point, because even when I was reading the book, and then I had conversations with Kim, who had already read the book, and we realized that there are certain scenarios whereby I'm actually more community-minded than she is, and vice versa, that I'm more independent-minded in certain areas. And it didn't have to do with the fact that I'm male and she's female. It was just more how we're wired and thinking about, different perspectives and different approaches. And I wanted to share a story which I really enjoyed from your book. And because I could relate to this working with Kim. Kim is an investment strategy expert. And oftentimes people are asking me questions about things, and I'll defer to her. And so you share a really great story where you worked with I would say, a very good ally in a male boss, somebody who you reported to, who was very supportive, and that you had done a 4-hour technical presentation, and yet the clients kept asking him questions, and he would continuously defer to you. And it wasn't until the 4th question got asked that they actually addressed it to you directly. But the first 3 questions, they were asking him, and he kept deferring to you. And so tell us a little bit about that relationship, and how did that help you understand these differences a little bit more?
Viktor, that's actually really interesting, and it's kind of one of those pivotal moments in your career, and I don't know that I really realized all that until after, because it's reflection that allows you to think about those things. This boss that I had was absolutely fabulous, and I wish everybody could have worked for him. Right? He was just a really great guy, and he actually hired me 5 times in my career in the same company. We kept moving around, and we ended up working together. And I really didn't realize how fabulous he was in terms of people development until I left the company and went out into the real world, right? And I found a lot of things were different then. So he was a real team builder, a real empowerer. And so when we went to this client, right, and he says, I'm just going to sit there. I'm not going to say anything. And I was nervous because this was, I was still new, right? So I'm like, I'm going to give him 4 hours of this. Oh, I'm going to mess it up. I was very frightened. And he came up with these lines, and he says, Karen just gave you 4 hours of this stuff. She's the expert. Ask her. And I was flabbergasted again. It was like, wow, this is great. And answered the question. And then, he kept doing that. And a lot of men would not have done that, I think. A lot of men would have said, well, I'll just answer the question. But that would have ripped all my credibility away. And one of his goals was to say, I don't want to do all this traveling anymore. I want you guys to be out in the field doing this. You're in your prime to go do this. I want to stay home with the grandkids. And that was so he had a motivation to get us boosted up so that he didn't have to go. And I think that was really helpful. But the way he did it was so empowering to me, right? And say, nope, she's the expert. Talk to her. And that had to have been hard, because a lot of people would have said, I want to claim the credit. Yeah, and he was not egotistical at all, and it was really nice.
Well, I want to give you so much credit for writing the book from the standpoint of looking at this and not necessarily, how should I put this? I was waiting to feel like I was the enemy as a male. Okay, in reading the book, and you never went there. And this is what I really liked, because what it drove was this awareness that says, it made me revisit my interactions with other female colleagues and saying, am I creating this problem, or am I championing against this issue? In trying to see where my blind spots might have been, either working with Kim or in the past with female colleagues. And so what I really like this towards the end of the book, as you noted, that this is more of a society problem than it is a male problem or a female problem or a workplace problem. It's something that in order for us to resolve and to fix, we have to do it together. You can't expect that one group is going to do it alone.
And Viktor, I think we've made some mistakes along this path, because I think at the beginning we didn't really know the problem we were solving. And in the industrial era, men set the stage and the norms for companies and for behavior. And nobody thought about it, because, they were working and the women were at home, right, until the war happened, right? And then things started to shift. But with those norms established, they're extremely difficult to change. So the first thing that happened was, I think men looked at women and they said, you don't act like us, so we're going to fix you, right? And we proceeded to go and launch off on a course teaching women assertiveness, right? Kim, you must remember the big shoulder pads, right? The shoulder pads and the suits, right? And the scarves that look like ties. And so the first thing we did was we said, okay, we'll just have all the women act like men, and everything will be peachy keen, right? And if your brain is wired that way, it may be very good. But if your brain is not wired that way, it may be extremely painful for you as a woman to behave that way. And it's something you can do in the short term, but in the long haul, it saps your creativity and it saps your productivity when you're acting out of what your own norm is, because you're forced by society. So we spent quite a long time fixing women, and then of course we started to blame men. Right? It's your fault. And I tried specifically not to do that in the book, because who wants to be blamed?
Right.
Nobody.
No one.
It's not fun. So I really tried to stay away from that. And partly because I realized many men have no idea of how women interpret what they're saying and feel that it's damaging to them. And so they don't really know that they've done anything wrong. And then all of a sudden you start pointing fingers at them and going, you're wrong. And that does not put people in a position to move forward in a positive manner. And so I knew that we had to back off from that. And it really isn't a men problem or a women problem. It really is, our society has ended up here. And I talk about that in the book, how we got here. But we've ended up here. So we should start here and say, let's deal with it.
So I love that phrase. My kids always remember me saying, deal with it. It's funny. And so one of the things that I want to talk about is this whole idea of being direct, because you mention it in the book. And one of my 2020 goals is to be more direct, because I find that very hard to do. And that's actually more of my community-minded personality, saying that, I know I've had conversations in the past where I've said, I wish I was a guy so I could just be direct with this person and not cause any conflict. But we as women in the book, oftentimes we don't receive direct feedback because we have a hard time taking that feedback. And so people are being more indirect with us, and we are in turn indirect with other people because we have a hard time being direct. So this is a topic that I really love and want to hear more about what your thoughts are.
So Kim, it's a really good point. Women are by society trained to be indirect. So instead of saying, I'm hungry, let's stop at this restaurant, right? Women will say, oh, there's a restaurant. And their spouse or significant other in the car is supposed to interpret that means they're hungry. And you got to think that's kind of hard to make that leap, right? It just doesn't happen. And then they will get mad because he didn't stop. And it's like, well, you didn't tell him to stop. But we've all been encultured in this norm. And so it's like we're all playing this game, but the only people we're hurting is ourselves. So I think women have to learn to be more direct and to say, no, that's not working for me, right? I need for you to do it a different way. Or to say, if you would do it this way, you would get a much better response out of me. Right. I love that. And I think I just had a deja vu of saying, oh, there's a restaurant. I like that restaurant. And not getting a reaction from Viktor. Because you didn't know, right?
Yeah.
And, I got to say, for the people who are direct, when somebody's really indirect, they're sitting there, what am I supposed to do with that, right? Mm-hmm. And I encourage people now, if you're in that position, Viktor, to look at Kim and say, what was I supposed to do with that information? Because that's now a question to say, would you like to be more direct without being rude, right?
Yeah.
To say, because it's like, I think I'm confused now. What did you intend? And it's really okay to ask what's your intention so that people can get more clear. Because when we're clear, it's easy.
I do that oftentimes with work and when I'm working with clients, because I think I understand what they're saying, but it's very easy for me to assume and interpret and go from there. And so one of the things I learned very early in this career is to say, well, what do you mean by that? And ask more.
That is brilliant. And just that simple, what did you mean by that, can draw out tons of information that sit just below the surface. Information, assumptions, this is how the world is put together that you may or may not agree with. And a lot of times, people get into arguments about things that are below the surface, but they're never actually talking about them. They're talking around them and over them, but they never get to the level of what's the assumption that you're making that's causing you to say it that way. And when you actually drop the conversation into that level, you will find amazing information that people will offer you. And it's like, oh, I didn't know that.
Right.
And that explains why you did what you did. I get it now, right? And we need to get there more, but it takes time. And that can be frustrating in this crazy paced world that we live in.
Well, I've adopted the what do you mean by that? Because you do ask it a lot, and I think it's great. And sometimes you find that you're both arguing for the same thing. It's just you're both kind of approaching it from two different perspectives. And there's been, like I go back to the earlier comments I said about the book is driving that awareness. There was that checkpoint for me in kind of self-evaluating the things that I'm doing right or the things that I could do different or better. And it's interesting because just in the dynamic between male, female, and then, of course, we work together, we're married, that occasionally Kim will come and she'll talk to me about something. And I'm sitting there and my male brain is thinking, okay, she wants me to fix it. And she doesn't want me to fix it. And so I've gotten to the point where I ask her, I go, do you want me to help you fix it? Or do you just want me to listen? What do you want me to be? Like which community minded or independent minded, And it really works for us because sometimes that's all she's looking for is just an ally and somebody she wants empathy. And I get that. And then other times she is looking for a solution, but I don't want to guess which one it is and then upset her by guessing wrong.
Victor, that's beautiful. I took a class at Crotonville, which GE runs, and one of the things that they suggested in the class for it was a manager class, right? They said, sometimes you need to ask people how they want you to be. And I actually I put up on my wall, I had open office hours. For these 2 hours, anybody can come in, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you need, right? You don't need an hour, just come in. But the first question that my admin would say to everybody, make sure you tell Karen how you want her to be. Do you want her to solve a problem? Do you want her just to shut up and listen? Do you want, to explain the problem and see if she can recommend people you ought to go talk to about it? Tell her how you want it to be. Because I was in solving problems for these people and they were like, I really need to get this off my chest. I just need to vent. And that's okay, but tell people.
Right. So true. We need to be more intentional or more, more direct with what we want when we go into a conversation.
One of the areas that I wanted to explore in the book, which I thought was very powerful, is how addressing or at least recognizing the need for diversity, that there are a lot of benefits to an organization or a group that does take on that diversity, and specifically looking at financial benefits to an organization, as well as the benefits that come with driving innovation. So can you tell us a little bit about how what women have to offer can increase both your economic benefits and innovation?
I am amazed that these numbers have been out there for several years and that companies haven't latched onto this as the greatest productivity and financial incentive to be more diverse. Hewitt did a study they've done several studies, and they found out that companies with diversity are 45% more likely to capture new markets. right? And I'm like, there's all these companies, particularly here in Silicon Valley, right, that we're out to get this new market. We're creating new products that don't even exist. How do we approach the market? And they don't have diverse teams. And the numbers are there. Catalyst has numbers, right? Hewitt has numbers. They're all over the place. You get a lot better financial results when you have a diverse team. And they've even studied this. It starts at the board level, but it goes all the way down into the organization, and it's because they have a variety of ideas and thoughts. You're thinking about things more holistically. You're looking at more aspects, and that's what actually gives you the better financial results. It's the talking about, who are our clients and what do they need. And if you ask people with diverse opinions, you get very different answers, and it can lead you to tap into markets that you don't even know were there. In the book, I interviewed a gentleman, and he was absolutely fabulous. And he talked about the diversity. This company was developing a brand new drug. It worked a completely different way than any other drugs for prostate cancer. And he looked at the statistics, and he said, wow, look, African American men are like 4 times more likely to have prostate cancer. And he said, so that's our target market, right? And he's talking to the sales guy, and they said, well, no, we're not going after that market. And he was dumbfounded as to why you wouldn't take the market that had much higher. And it's 4 times for crying out loud, right? And they said, oh, no, those guys don't come in. They don't take their medication regularly. They don't. And he got this load of excuses, right? And so he finally says, okay, look, so maybe the whole sales force won't do this. I want to do one experiment. We want to go after 3 African-American doctors, and we want to see if we can really make a dent in this, right? Let's test and see what all this stuff you're giving me is true or not true. And, of course, the sales guy, it's kind of like a bet, right? So it's like, okay, we'll see what you can do with this, sweetie. And he went out, and they said, we got to have measurement criteria, right? This is business. So if you can get 30% of this doctor's patients on these drugs, right, who need them, obviously, then we'll call it a success. Guess what he got? 100% of these doctors' patients who needed the drug took the drug. Wow. Absolutely phenomenal. It became this huge expanding funnel by which the drug hit the market, and it just expanded uncontrollably in the African American population. And then the sales team, of course, looking at those numbers, went, we're not getting anything like this, right? And so they started really going after the market. And then they found, wow, we don't have enough salespeople that look like the doctors that are our target market, right? That represent our target patients. And so all of a sudden, they started recruiting a lot more diverse populations. And it really made a huge difference in the company. And it wasn't hard. Everybody got why we need to have the diversity, because we need to look like the market that we're serving. And more companies, right, need, I think, to do that, because they're serving more and more markets, and they're serving more specialized markets. And if you don't, Kim, your market is tech girls, right? And so you've really defined a narrow market segment, but you know exactly what they need.
Right. And I always say it's I can understand that being a minority and a male dominated profession, and so I really enjoy working with them because I understand their needs.
And that's all about why you need the diversity. And you can serve their needs if you can hear them. But frequently we filter that information out because we don't have people who can hear it.
Well, and I love the word that you used, harmony, because I think it really explains that. My family is a musical family, and even if you think about the piano, you can play the tune with one hand or you can play it with the 2 hands, but it sounds so much better when you've got the 2 hands playing the different pieces of that. And it's so much richer. And I think you're saying the same thing when it comes to diversity in the workplace, because there are some that maybe more bass, right? And some that are going to be more treble and more of the tune and the melody. And so together, they can all work.
And I love that point. But it takes a while. If you've got one person playing with their left hand on the piano and another person sitting next to them playing with their right hand, it takes a little practice to make it flow. And that's right where we are in this issue, right? I think we're just learning, how do you do that and what does it take? And my book offers a common language that people can use that is not, it's a guy thing, it's a girl thing, right?
Yes.
So I've tried to remove that stigma, so that it's just that we're different and we have to figure out how we can communicate more effectively so that everybody's getting their needs met.
Right.
And going back to the financial benefits, which wasn't a surprise to me because I'd seen similar statistics before, but it had to do with how women really do control a lot of the consumer spending and making the financial decisions. It's not lost on us, working as financial advisors and working with couples especially, that it's so important that you have both in the meeting and part of the discussion, just because they will take the information and internalize it differently. And so it's important for us to gauge exactly where the concerns are and where the opportunities lie too in the development of their own portfolios.
Right. And what couples want, right? Because what a husband is looking at to fix and solving one problem, and wife may be wanting to fix a different problem, but both of those problems are really important and need to be addressed.
You mean your clients don't agree? Husband and wives don't have it all together?
Well, I want to say that this book, we are taking it now personal, and I will say that this book is not just for your professional life, but your personal life too.
I think so too.
I've heard that from several people now, so that it's not why I wrote it, but apparently it's good for that.
Oh, it is. I mean, it explains so much. Recently I was having a disagreement with my dad, and it was like, okay, Kim, Viktor approached me and he goes, Kim, he's a guy. He doesn't want you to fix this, or whatever it was. And I was like, I thought about what Viktor said, and I go, he's right. On this one, it doesn't matter if there is a solution for this. I'm not going to be the one to fix it. And so it was really a revelation that I thought, wow, it's important for us to understand, again, when we're supposed to be empathetic and when we're supposed to solve a problem.
Very true.
That's true. So you mentioned that you've been getting a lot of feedback on the book. So how has the book been received, and what are people saying about it?
Well, I'm very excited. It just published in December, right? So it's still a really new book. Now. But so far, I've accumulated 6 5-star reviews on Amazon. So I'm pretty thrilled about that. And like you said, there's a couple of comments. It says, this is not just for business, which is really why I wrote it. But it leaks right over into your personal life immediately. It can be really beneficial. So I'm thrilled about that part.
Right. And I tell you, I would love to see in the future some conferences out there where we are talking about this, because I go to a lot of women's conferences, which I love. I have fun, and I be the community minded person that I can be, and they're really fun. But I don't think it is solving the issue of how do we have harmony? How do we get there? Because we're not addressing things that we can't see. And so I think I would love to see conferences where you bring in men and women, and we look at each other and talk about the independent minded and the community minded and really get it.
That I think is one of the areas that we failed. It became a women's issue.
Yeah.
And then women started having conferences and going off and talking about it, but we left the guys out. And they are a critical part. It's how we work together how each of us works independently is irrelevant. But how we work together is where the friction comes, and it's where we need to be. So you really have to have both people in the party to fix it.
Right. And unfortunately, we have done conferences where we've invited the men to go to them, but then the topics were so uninteresting to them. I think we scared them off.
I wouldn't doubt that. And let me tell you, as a woman in tech, I'm used to being the only woman in the room. Mm-hmm. There are many men that are not used to being the only man in the room, and that can be terrifying, right? So I have some tips actually in the book that came from David Smith. He wrote Athena Rising with his co-author Brad Johnson, and I interviewed him for the book, which was really fun. He's brilliant. But at the end of one of his emails, when I sent him some information and said, please make sure this is okay. And at the end of one of his emails, he had this whole list of tips for men attending conferences for women. And I went, this is brilliant. I said, can I put this in my book? And he said, yes. And so that's a piece that's in my book for the guys. And it's kind of unexpected. It's you need to act a little bit differently. You need to sit back and you need to listen, and you really need to hear what people are saying before you speak up. Don't jump in and solve the problem, Kim. Okay. you need to go, but be in a listening mode. Mm-hmm. And ask a lot of questions, right? Victor, you said you started to ask more questions. Ask, what does that feel like? And really try to understand, and you will come away with a very different perspective.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting because a lot of times in my business, I will listen to people and they'll tell me all these things that are going on in their lives. And it's really important, especially I think, and I do have a lot of women clients, so this is what comes of it, is it's really important to just validate how they're feeling, because it's a lot, and, lives are complicated and stressful. And first, you can't even get to solving the problem if you don't show that you care and you empathize with them.
That it's a vital human skill to say, to start a conversation with, I care about you, what's happening.
Yeah. And
to actually listen and get it. And often when people cough that up the first time, that that's this high layer, right? But there's depth to it. So sometimes you have to ask 2 or 3 times what's underneath that, because there is something underneath that. And when you understand those, you can really start recommending solutions that people will latch onto immediately and go, that's what I want.
Right. Mm-hmm. The other thing I think is really interesting is that I come from a family that asked a lot of questions. My mom and my sister asked detailed questions and nitpicked down, dialed down and down. And it was usually like this. Well, did you ask them this? And did you get that? And what did you say when they told you this? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I just listened. And my mom and my sister both say this. If you don't ask more questions, it doesn't look like you care.
Interesting.
And so it's really funny how they said that. And I guess they've told me that enough times that I actually did believe that. And I think sometimes people feel very uncomfortable because it means you have to ask some tough questions. And not everybody can answer those. And so I know for me, it's helped for me to preface it with, I know this must be tough for you to talk about, and then I ask a question because I want to be sensitive to that. Right?
That bit of empathy really opens the door, but you have to be careful, Kim. So if you're around an independent-minded person and you barrage them with questions, you could try it with Viktor sometime. Right. Not now, okay? They feel like they're under attack. Mm-hmm. And they go into attack, I'm going to go hide in the closet. Please leave me alone. I can't deal with this. And it's funny, and I've seen it in many men how you ask the questions is important, but also, maybe they need to understand why you need to know all this information.
Right.
Because they feel like you're like trying to extract their brain, right? And they're like, why do you need this, right? You're making me crazy.
Yeah. So prefacing the question is I think, really important.
Yeah. Well, and believe me, Karen, I have been under attack, so.
Not you, Victor.
Yes. Well, because the response is I'm much more guarded is, and if I tell you, what will you do with the information? It's like, why do you need to know? And so it just opens up conversations, though. But,
right.
It's a big gender difference.
Yeah.
And we trip over it at work all the time, and you don't even know that it's there because you don't know that that's the issue. You're just going, why is he not answering my questions? And Victor's going, why is she pestering me with all these questions? Right? And you don't get that that's the issue, right? But it makes people very uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So we're talking about, communication, and you can't fix what you can't see. This was such a great book, highly recommended. This year, Karen, we're celebrating 10 years of independence, and so we anticipate a full year of celebrations, this being the kickoff of the third season of the podcast. So excited to have you on the program. But I think there's so much more here to talk about. And so we'd love to see maybe an opportunity sometime this year that we can get you in front of some clients or get you in front of some friends or colleagues, just expand more on this, to have that conversation about what you can't fix, what you can't see.
Oh, that would be super fun, right? I would really enjoy doing that because you have some very interesting clients. So, and the more I talk about these things, the more I learn. Every time I learn new nuances and things, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So it's just, fodder for me, right? I love that.
Right.
So what's next? Are you thinking maybe doing a follow-up at some point? Was this a one-shot deal, or, where are you thinking?
It can never be a one-shot deal until we fix this issue.
Okay.
My goal is to put myself, and I hate to say this, but all the diversity and inclusion people out of business because there's no problem to fix. We've got it licked. But lucky for me, I don't think that's going to happen in the short term. So I think we have a ways to go. So it's going to take a while, and but I'd like to put myself out of a job. That's my goal.
Well, I would like to see you out of a job because that would mean we have made success and progress, right?
You got it.
And I mean that in a sincere way.
Oh, definitely. No, that would be I'd be cruising the Riviera then, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, isn't that where we all want to end up?
In the Riviera.
Yeah. The Riviera.
The Italian Riviera. Yeah, I could do that. So we'll be sure to include, link to the book on the podcast notes. But if people want to learn more about you, or can you share, where if they want to learn more about the book, where they can go today?
Yes, the book has a website, so it's www.youcan'tfixwhatyoucan'tsee, all run together.com. And from there, you can hook into my LinkedIn profile. I'd love to talk to more people. I am going to be starting my own podcast. I think you guys are like instigators of that. And the goal for my podcast is going to be different. And so I'm looking for people who want to be on the podcast. I want to present, as a result of writing the book, I heard a lot of horror stories and a few success stories. So my podcast is going to be about companies that have success stories and they want to share what they did. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it's better if, we tried this, we rolled it out, we had to shift, we blew this, it wasn't right, but we finally got there. But these are the things we did because I think we can grow and change the world a lot faster when we all contribute. This is what's working. This is what worked for us. Go try it. Because a lot of this is not rocket science, but it can be scary. And so where things have worked, I want to share those with the listeners, right? And so we can really accelerate the progress that we're making.
Right. I find that growth is uncomfortable. You do not get to grow unless you get outside of your comfort zone.
It hurts.
And that's really what we're talking about doing.
Right. It's a stretch. It's different. It's uncomfortable. But I think it's something we have to go to get to a much, much better place.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, it sounds so. Let us know when the show launches. We'll be happy to talk about it. Well, with that, thank you so much for being part of the program today and sharing your thoughts and insights on your new book, You Can't Fix What You Can't See. It's been a thrill talking about it, and I really enjoyed reading it. And so you got to check it out. If you haven't already seen it, definitely check it out.
Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks. It was great fun.
It was.
All right.
If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future shows, please send an email to Viktor@techgirlfinancial.com or join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag AskTGF. We also encourage you to follow us on the Tech Girl Financial page on Facebook and connect with us on LinkedIn.
Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Tech Girl Financial and Cambridge Investment Research, Inc. are not affiliated companies.
Skrrr.